Hello everyone, welcome to our new video lecture for our series on basic social statistics, and for this video we will be talking about measures of variability. So the contents for this topic is we're going to be discussing the basic concepts and descriptions of what measures of variabilities are, and then we also are going to be talking about some of the basic ones that we're going to be using and that we usually use for social statistics. And we have range, standard deviation, variance, interquartile range, and other relevant descriptive statistics in relation to variabilities or measures of spread. And then I will be teaching you how to compute this using the Jamovi software. And then finally, since this is the second part of looking at descriptive statistics, I'm going to be showing you how we present statistical findings of descriptive statistics in a usual APA style thesis. Alright, so a short description of measures of variability. Sometimes they're called measures of spread. And basically, the term variability specifies or signifies how far apart the scores are spread. And for this specific video, we'll be talking about 4 general measures of variability. And we have range, standard deviation, variance, and then interquartile range. Basically, variability tells us how far apart the scores are from each other, how different they are. And then there are different characteristics that we're trying to look at to see how far apart the values are in a given data set. So the first one and the easiest one is the range. So the range is the difference between the highest score in the distribution, the lowest score in the distribution. Okay, so it's simply the highest score minus the lowest score. So the difference of that is your range. While it's the most basic, the major limitation of the range as a measurement is that it only measures the spread of the extreme scores and not the spread of any score in between the highest and the lowest scores. And especially when you're working with Likert scales that are averaged in nature, if your highest score is 5 and your lowest score is 1, then it is always automatic that your range will be 4. No, so it doesn't really give you it really doesn't really give you any insight of the data, especially if Likert scales give you a specific amount of range of possible scores, which is 1 to 5. No, like unlike, for instance, more free ranging continuous variables like, for example, age. So age can be a little bit more unpredictable in terms of the highest and the lowest score. But in terms of Likert scales, it's predictable only because the researchers have set kung ano yung pinakamataas and the pinakamababa na score in the data set. So it doesn't really give you much insight, especially if it's a Likert scale. The next one, and the most commonly used measure of variability, is standard deviation. So it tells you on average how far each values lie from the mean. So in short, it's the mean of the distance of each value to the mean, right? So it's very useful because it's what we use in tandem with mean. And as we know, mean is used as a major descriptive statistics that we use for inferential stats and hypothesis testing. So we're going to be mentioning standard deviation a lot. So basically, we don't really have so if this for a specific value, what does that mean? Basta it gives us this idea that when there's a high standard deviation, it means that the values are generally far from the mean. While a low standard deviation indicates that values are clustered close to the mean. So in short, the higher the standard deviation, the more close the closer the values are in terms of their value. The closer the data points are in terms of value. So that is for lower standard deviation. And then the higher standard deviation means that it's very spread apart, the values within the data set. Sometimes standard deviations can be higher than the mean, and it means that they're really extreme scores within the data set. And it gives us an idea, a picture of whether there are outliers in a given data set. We'll talk about outliers later when we talk about, deciding parametric and non-parametric statistics. The next one is the variance. So variance is very much related to the standard deviation, although we don't use that and separately present the variance. No? So basically, the variance is calculated by taking the average of the squared deviations from the mean. So it's, in short, it's a square of the standard deviation. Or it is the standard deviation before a square root is done. So like I said, I won't be really explaining how the formulas look like because you've had that in your elementary statistics, but that's how it is. No? So the more spread the data, the larger the variance is in relation to the mean, just like your standard deviation. And then standard deviation is the difference between standard deviation and variance is that since the variance is a squared deviations from the mean and standard deviation is the deviations from the mean. So we usually use the standard deviation because they have the same units as the original value of the mean. And so nag-uusap yung mean and the standard deviation more that the variance is talking to the mean. No? However, we use variance later when we do inferential statistics because we're going to be talking a lot about how certain variables affect the variance of another given variable when we're talking about regression, for instance. No? So, but for the meantime, I guess the quickest differentiating factor between the standard deviation and the variance is that standard deviation and variance, although they measure the average of deviations within the mean, for variance it's square deviations, and therefore the variance, the units is not the same with the mean. So usually if the units is let's say meters, no, so nagiging meters squared siya if it's variance, and if it's standard deviation, kung ano yung unit of measure ni mean, then that will also be the unit of measure for the standard deviation. By the way, standard deviation, another way that we can present it is, for example, you have the mean, and then you have the plus minus sign, and then you write the ST. So that's another way of measuring it, no? Or presenting the standard deviation. Next one, we have the interquartile range. So the interquartile range is more related to the median than the mean. So the interquartile range tells you the spread of the middle half of your distribution. So when you talk about quartiles first, if you're going to look at the highest and the lowest score of your sample or your data set, and then you're going to divide them into 4 equal parts. So 1 equal part is a quarter, right? And then the point to which you go from one quarter to the next is called a quartile. So we have the Q1, Q2, Q3, and of course Q4. So Q4 is basically the same as the maximum. And then Q1 is the first 25%, Q2 is the 50%, and then usually the Q2 is your median, right? So, because it's the second quarter, so pag hinati mo siya sa dalawa, yun din yung median. And then Q3 is the 75% and 100% is your Q4. But we don't usually look at Q4 because maximum and Q4 are just the same. Q2 and median are also the same. So, the range between Q1 or the 25%, the first 25% of your data set and the 75%, that's called the interquartile range. So quartile segment any distribution that's ordered from low to high into 4 equal parts, I explained, no? And then the interquartile range contains the second half, so ito siya, the second and the third quartiles. I'm sorry, the second and the third quartile, or the middle half of your data sets. So ito siya. So the interquartile range, ito, yung layo ng dalawa. Whereas the range gives you the spread of the whole data set, the interquartile range gives you the range of the middle half of the data set. So unlike standard deviation and variance, interquartile range really is more related to the median than the mean. And usually we use interquartile range for certain research questions that asks for consensus. No? Pagka ang gusto nating makita ay consensus building, for example, the Likert scale, we want to see if people are agreeing at the same are agreeing, or there's a majority of people agreeing with a specific sentiment or opinion, then we use an interquartile range for that. No, but we we don't usually use those types of research designs for the bachelor's degree. No, usually we use it for Delphi techniques. No, maybe you've heard of Delphi techniques before, especially if you've been exposed to policy research. But interquartile range is one of the ways that we can really establish whether certain stakeholders have a consensus in terms of agreements in relation to certain opinions. No, so consensus, we use IQR or interquartile range. And so, where do you find it in Jamovi? So, you find it same. No, you find it in the exploration tab, and then you will be seeing here. We've discussed this already: the mean, the median, and the mode in the previous discussion. So, where do we find your questions? The interquartile range here. So, the IQR or interquartile range, andito siya. The range you can find here. The variance is here. The standard deviation is here, and then of course you have another term for measures of spread and measures of variability is measures of dispersion. You can also compute or find out in the data set in a given variable, which is the minimum and the maximum. Although, like I said, when you discuss about Likert scales, like most of the variables that we are measuring in the social sciences, in the behavioral sciences, madalas, the minimum and the maximum had already been set up by the researcher kasi Likert scales nga, so 1 to 5. So, interesting lang ang finding out the range, the minimum and the maximum if mas free yung pagsagot nila, no, for variables like age or variables like household size or variables like let's say a body mass index, weight or height, no, we don't really set a minimum or maximum in that. There's no options for a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. People write the actual value. So it's interesting to look at minimum and maximum that way and range that way. But for Likert scales, not really so much. And then the other values here, or for example, if you want to also look at, let's say, Q1, Q2, and Q3, you can use this one, no? The cutoff points, no? That tells us Q1, Q2, Q4, no? And for percentiles, no, you can also have the 25, 50, or 75. Percentiles compared to quartiles is parang 100%, no? Pag sinabi nating percentile mo is 75, or let's say percentile, you're going to look at the percentile point at 70 or P70. It means that you're going to look at the value wherein 70% of the values are under it. No, so yun yung sa percentile. And then P50 is your median. So median, since we're discussing that already, median is the same as Q. Sorry, let's use another color. It's the same as Q. Sorry, not Q4. It's the same as Q2, right? Because the second quarter is half of the score, and it's also the same as P50. Because 50% of 100 is also half of it. So these are the median, Q2 and P50 are the same. But if you want to be more precise, right? For example, the question is, you want to just you have a price for, let's say, you have a price for 70 people out of, let's say, 200 people in your class, no? And you have a price for the upper 70%, no, for the upper 30%. So what you get is you get the percentile point P70 para makita mo yung score wherein everything above that score is going to be receiving a prize, no. So kasi you only have enough awards for 30% of the class, no. So that's one way of looking at percentile, no. But we don't usually use P percentile for hypothesis testing. No, it's really more of basic decision making. No, but not really for academic. Well, some academic research use that for the thesis that we are doing. No, in our specific departments, we don't usually use that. Alright, so that's a quick rundown of the different measures of variability and some of the commands found in Jamovi where you can find them, and then we will move to how to compute them using Jamovi, and then after that we're going to be presenting to you how to present the basic or the important descriptive statistics in your result section in a thesis using the APA format. All right, so we have here the same data set that we used for the last video lecture, and then we already uploaded it to Jamovi. I already taught you how to do that, no? So let's try to see how we can compute some of the measures of variability that we discussed previously. All right, so again, we go for exploration and then we choose descriptives. And then what we do first is, well, first I would like to put them on rows so it's easier to look at. And then let's just choose muna for the meantime, no? Um, the tests that we want, no? So for the variability, if that's only what you want, no, we just so we have here the standard deviation, the variance, the range. If you want to have the minimum and maximum, if you like that, it's okay also. And then we have the IQR here. And then we can also kind of also remove already mean, median muna for the meantime, no? All right. And then we can already also put like the cutoff points, no, for the percentiles, right? So we can have the Q1, Q2, and then Q3 if we also want those. So basically it's just clicking it and then you can already have you can put the values that you want to look at. Like for example, if you just want to be able to see satisfaction with life, which is also what we used as our dependent variable in the previous. You can put everything here, and we can see here the SD for each, you know, and you have the variance here. Remember that the variance is a squared. So kung ano man yung, although of course the Likert scales, the Likert scales that we use, they don't really have a measure, but if these had measure, then the variance would be squared. And this is the IQR. So ibig sabihin, this is the value. This is the length, no, between the Q1 and the Q3, no? And then you have here the range. Tulad nga nasabi ko sa inyo, look at the range. It's 6 because the highest score is 7, the lowest score is 1. But it's interesting, like for example, when you look at the sum, because we didn't really average it, we summed it. So the range now, the available range is from 7 as the lowest score and then 35 as the highest score. So when you sorry, the 5 is the lowest score, then 35 as the highest score. So we see here that may minimum ng 5 and then may maximum ng 35. So but again, it will most likely be the same. And then hindi masyadong magandang, hindi masyadong cute tingnan yung percentiles because again these are Likert scales. But if we like move to continuous data that are not really like set up by the researcher because they're not Likert scales. So for example, a good example for that would be the age, no? So makita natin yung age kung so yan, nakita natin na that the SD is 5.27. So medyo it's kind of spread out, no, the SD, no? Although of course the SD only becomes really interesting to us if we are like differentiating two groups from each other. So for example, if we split this by generational identities, I'm just gonna put SD here. So for example, the SD for the because 0 means Gen Zs. So makita ninyo that the spread of the age within the Gen Z cohort is lesser compared to the spread of those from the Gen Y. So doon siya mas nagiging interesting na. If you are categorizing the data, doon siya mas nagiging interesting, no? And then when you see the IQR, no, the interquartile range, no, you would see na mas tight yung scores within the Gen Zs compared to Gen Ys. But that's not very surprising because the Gen Zs are, just coming into play, and not many of them are already in the legal age, and then our target was legal aged people, so we really expect a lower standard deviation from them. And when you look at the range, no, mas maliit ang range natin for the Gen Zs kasi again that's only because we cannot consider the ones who are not yet in the legal age. So bawal tayo sa age of minorities. But when you look at the Gen Ys, no, itong 16, no, makita nyo talaga na spread apart yung mga nakuha nating Gen Y in the. So the measures of variability is more interesting to discuss if we are comparing two groups from each other. For example, you want to compare the SD and the variance and the IQR of, let's say, satisfaction with life. So you would see here that the standard deviation of those from the Gen Zs are more magkapareho, no? Or not really magkapareho. It's not as spread as it is in Gen Z, because you would see the SD and the variance are higher. Even the IQR is higher, no? Um, between them, no? And the median also is different between the two of them. But this doesn't really say that they are significantly different. The tools that we need to really answer whether this difference is something that's significant, that really differentiates group 1 and group 2 from each other, we're going to be using inferential statistics for that. And that is going to be um, for future lectures, no? So ayun. So but again, no, at the end of the day, no, so because we are just discussing this in terms of topics, no, syempre we talk about measures of central tendency muna, where they converge, and then we talk about measures of variability and how they diverge. Syempre, when you report descriptive statistics, no, you don't use all of them, no. You use it based on what you are asking in the research question or what you need. If it's you're using statistics for practice purposes or for program evaluation or whatever, so you just use what is important. So you don't really analyze them separately. Usually you put them together. So usually my go-to, no, or not really my go-to, but the ones that we usually use for continuous variables in the social science and behavioral sciences are mean and median. So usually kung ano yung nilalagay ko, no, is usually yung naka-click sa akin whenever I make descriptives ay standard deviation. I could probably put range because maybe I need it, no? But mean, I would put definitely. I would put n, no? I would remove cutoff points. I might need to put like mode just for me to know which value is the highest among the many, and then but it doesn't mean that I have to report everything, huh? Usually what we just report is the mean and the standard deviation for continuous variables. But I'm just putting it like this is my go-to set of descriptive stats to just give me a bird's eye view of how the values look like. Right, so it's mean, median, SD range, minimum, and maximum. Later on, when you become researchers, you may also be looking at IQR because you're interested in it, or you wanna like look at median also because you're interested in it. It's fine. It's really nice for you. But in our case, no, in my case, this is what I usually go to. For me, especially when I'm looking at Likert scales, these are the ones that make most sense to me, right? So if I put in here the SWS, that's what these are the things that I want to see. I compare the mean and the SD, no, and then I compare the SDs for each of the items, so I kind of have an idea whether or not they are they have a different or a pretty similar way of answering a specific item, no, and then I look at the means also, so that I would know whether or not there are certain items that they answer more, or they rate higher compared to the others, no. So this is like my go-to, no, my N, mean, median, SD, range, minimum, and maximum. Although I might, if this is a not an online survey, I might need to put missing because baka hindi kompleto lahat, no. But since this is an online survey and then we required everything, so I wouldn't put missing anymore. So there you go. This is my go-to descriptive stats, no, together with the measures of central tendency and the measures of variability that I think would mean most to me when I do my research, and when I do research, or when we do research in social sciences and behavioral sciences. And later on, I will present to you how we present descriptive findings together with textual appreciation of the findings and put them in an APA style table after this segment. Hi everyone. So now I'm going to be discussing with you how the descriptive result should look like in a usual APA style thesis paper. No? So you already can compute your mean and your STs and the frequency and the percentage, which are usually the more important tests that we use for describing the variables in our study. So siguro before that, let's put things into perspective. Let's always think that we're doing this in the context of the research. I know that we're retrofitting it. No, ideally we start with thinking about the problem, and then that's the time we get the instruments. You identify the variables based on the problems and the relationships you want to test, and then we try to design a methodology to be able to measure those variables, get instruments, and then decide on stats. And that's the time we do the stats. However, since this is a stat class, we kind of skip that already. And what we're doing is we're retrofitting the variables that you have collected and chosen for your specific study, and think of it in the context of research. So we're kind of retrofitting it. So I want to see how you kind of imagine your current variables in the context of research. So for instance, in the sample data set that I am working with for this class, what I am using are the main variable that I'm interested in is national resilience. And I wanted to see whether national resilience of Gen Y and Gen Z Filipinos, millennials and Gen Zs in particular, are related with social demographic characteristics. So social demographic characteristics being the antecedent variables, and then national resilience being the main variable, and then that main variable of national resilience will have an influence on an outcome variable, which is life satisfaction. So, for example, in your specific variables, your antecedents, your social gradients will be your social demographic characteristics and your educational profile, whichever you've selected. And then your main variable will be the citizenship behavior that that was selected for you, or you selected. And then you're going to correlate the citizenship behaviors with well-being outcomes that you've chosen, whether that's mental well-being or what do you call this, or so self-actualization. So that's basically the basic frameworks that is common to everyone. But again, when you go to your thesis subjects, you will be able to understand that there are certain strategies and additions that you can do, but we're just making everything basic for the meantime. So what is important for this class is that you'll be able to try out as many fundamental statistical strategies and tools for you to be able to design properly, or design and analyze properly for your thesis. All right. So in this case, so I want you to make your working title as well based on that idea. So in my case, in our design, in our data set, I'm naming the study National Resilience Among Gen Y and Z Filipinos in its correlation with social demographic characteristic, which is the antecedent, and life satisfaction, which is the intended outcome of national resilience. So in the relationship between social demographic characteristics and national resilience, the independent variable is social demographic characteristics, and the dependent is national resilience. And in the relationship between national resilience and life satisfaction, it could be national resilience as the independent variable and the life satisfaction as the dependent variable. So if we're kind of draw that, so social demographic characteristics, that's the antecedent, and then your mean is the national resilience, and then the outcome for that will be your life satisfaction. All right, so basically that is it for you. Okay, so remember APA style, so it's double space. This is not the class for us to discuss APA style in detail, but I know that you've been using this in your previous classes before, so you just have to apply it. So and also I want you to make kind of a statement of the problem that retrofits the current variables and whatever needs to be tested. No? So for example, in this case, this study aims to describe the national resilience of Gen Y and Z Filipino. So basically describing first the the main variable of interest. And then furthermore, it determines the relationship of national resilience with social demographic characteristics and life satisfaction, just to establish its correlation with the main variable. And then you have, of course, the general statement of the problem, and then you have the specific research questions. So the first specific research question should be asking or describing the current the variables, no, of the study. So descriptive muna, and that is questions 1, 2, and 3. So 1 asks about the socio-demographic characteristics that we've collected. And then number 2, asking about their national resilience based on the indicators of national resilience that we have identified. And then we have life satisfaction also, which is the outcome of interest. So ang sasagutin lang natin for this specific video, and what you will do is the first 3 questions. And maybe most likely you'll also be answering the first 3 questions, but I've already laid down the other questions that we will be also doing for statistics purposes later for inferentials and hypothesis testing. So 1 is asking about the relationship between social demographic and national resilience. So that's a bivariate analysis. So we're looking at 2 variables at a time, and then looking at the relationship. And then what is the relationship between national resilience and life satisfaction? So we're looking at, again, the relationship between the national resilience, the main variable, and the outcome variable, which is life satisfaction. And then the last one is a regression question. So when we go to regression, this is how we will answer. So does social demographic and national resilience predict life satisfaction? This is more of a multivariate analysis because we're putting all of the variables under social demographic characteristics and under national resilience and see whether or not that is going to predict the variance of life satisfaction. So, but that will be for later. For the meantime, we will just be answering 1, 2, and 3. So when we do quantitative research, when we answer that, we answer using statistical outputs. And for descriptive statistics, the main ones that we use, and this is based on the nature of the variable, is frequency percentage for dichotomous and categorical variables. And then you have your mean and standard deviation for your continuous variables. And then if it's a Likert scale, then that mean and SD has to have some form of verbal interpretation, something that we've already done in the previous video. So, and also at the same time, while showing those outcomes in a tabular form, we also have to appreciate or explicitate those findings via text, textual explicitation of those variables. So let's start first with the demographic profile that we have collected in this study. So here are the findings, no, based from what we got from Jamovi. So remember, you don't just copy paste what is found in Jamovi. So you're just going to include the values that are pertinent to answering the research questions. And in this case, we have 2. No, we have frequency and percentage for categorical or dichotomous variables, and then we have mean and SD for continuous variables. So in this specific study, no, only estimated age in years is the continuous variable. So as you can see, the label of the columns have n and then under open and close parenthesis mean. So this is kind of signifying that some of the values you would see here are n's or frequencies, and then some of the values that you would see here are mean. So just to signify which one is the mean, I placed here a superscript and a footnote under the table says na this specific variable, what you're seeing in this column is a mean. So I think most journal articles would be really happy if you just put all of the things that should be going together in the same table, so it's easier to see in a general snapshot, no? Same thing here, no? Ang equivalent, a sort of equivalent or kind of analogy ng percentage in categorical with a continuous is the SD. So ito na yung SD ni age. So far, in the variables that we have, only age is the continuous and the rest is dichotomous or categorical. So sex, sign at birth, region, highest educational attainment, and income classification. So we just have here the signifier. So and then we have a table title. So the table title basically should be able to give an indication of what we are showing in the specific table. So in this case, it's social demographic profile of the respondents. Then open close parenthesis the number of sample that you've collected. I know that there are newer traditions, no. So usually when we use the big N, usually it refers to the population. But when you go to the results, the newer traditions when we're reporting is that the big N is the sample, and then the small n is the frequency of a specific category, as in here, no. So maybe you will find teachers who will prefer to call this as a small n, and this one is called as an F. That's a more traditional practice. No, this one is a more updated practice. No, that current journals are you look at the current your sample, the overall sample size is big N, and the specific frequencies is the small n. So we now have to textually explicitate this. No, so first we signify the table that we are explicitating. So table 1 shows the social demographic profile of the respondents. All right. The estimated the mean estimated age is 24.51. And then again, like I said, when you express SD, you can just say plus minus, and the next value will already signify that you're talking about the SD. So 24.51 plus minus 5.27, period. And then you now go to the next variable. So majority of the respondents are, so what's for the sex, the higher value is females. So we say here are females, and then we write the percentage 60.9%. And then from NCR, and then open and close parentheses, how many sila sa NCR? That's 70.6%. With a college degree, so that's 70.0%. And within the middle and within the middle economic class, socio-economic class. So I think this is the economic class, and then we place the 52.9%. So that's how you appreciate. No, so that's the textual explicitation, and then you follow with the table, and then you make it APA. So we make it APA. We remove we remove all the vertical lines and the inside horizontal lines, and just maintain the ones that separates your column heads with the content. So that's how it looks like for APA. Let's move to the next. So this one's a little bit trickier because you have here, no? So table 2, let's name it. So this one is national resilience among respondents. No? And then we place again n equals 714, which is the total sample we've collected. So now let's explicitate what we see here. So the first is so table 2 presents the mean as a standard deviation and verbal interpretation of scores per domain and indicator of national resilience among the Gen Y and Z respondents, right? And then, so what we do first is, there are many ways to do this, but one way that I usually do this is I interpret first the domain. So the domain identification, the domain identification with my country garnered a mean of 3.30 plus minus 1.492, which has a verbal interpretation of moderate. And then we place that in tawag diyan, quotes, direct quotes. And then we then also identify which indicator has the highest score. So let's see, 3.51. I think this is the one, no? Right. So the highest scoring item in this domain is, I believe, copy paste ko na lang. I believe that the government will make the right decision with a mean of 2.51 plus minus, or sinabi na natin the highest scoring item, tama. And then plus minus 1.251, all right, with a verbal interpretation of moderate. And then probably it's also nice to say that all indicators under this domain is within moderate levels, all right? Because all of them are moderate. Then let's move to the next. No, it's either you create a new, we create a new table, or I create a new paragraph, or we just continue. I guess we can create a new one. As regards to the domain of solidarity and social justice, the mean score is 3.31 plus minus 0.004 with a verbal interpretation of moderate. So yan yung sagot nyo. So what is the level? It's moderate, no? And then the highest scoring item is the expression. So ikano lang natin, no? Man is wolf to man, something. Pero reverse, naka-reverse code siya, no? So dapat naka-indicate kung ano yung naka-reverse code. Pero itong 4.24, ito na yung reverse coded niya na score. So, ibig sabihin, hindi naniniwala ang mga tao na man is wolf to man. So is society, right? And then we write the indication, society with a mean score, with a mean of 4.24 plus minus 1.155 with a verbally interpreted as high. And then we verbally interpreted as high, and then we just say that other items were at the moderate level. And then finally, we can go, or siguro isisingit na natin dyan, ano, kasi medyo mahinga. And then, in terms of, what's the last one? Trust in public institutions. In terms of the domain of trust in public institutions, the sulitan natin, the overall mean is 2.36. 2.36 plus minus 1.014. Tama ba? Yeah. With a verbal interpretation of moderate. The highest scoring item under this domain is I am confident in the educational system. I am confident in the educational system with a verbal interpretation. No. Mean muna pala. With a mean of 2.84. Okay. With a mean of 2.54 plus minus, 84. 2.84 plus minus 1.296. Verbally interpreted as moderate. Other items under this domain have scores within the low level range, something to that extent, no? And then you now report the overall composite score. So the mean overall composite score for national resilience is 2.88 plus minus 0.851 with verbal interpretation of moderate. So that's how you write it. And then remember, you don't cut the table. So I would usually put it in the next page na. Right? And then of course, I will now clean it up in terms of borders. So remove the vertical ones and just maintain those that separate your column heads. And then makita nyo, mean at saka SD na lang ang nakalagay. So we just put the mean, the SD. So wala na yung mga median mode. We just did it for purposes of practice. But what we'll maintain is just the mean per item, the SD per item, and then the verbal interpretation per item. I guess to make this a little bit cleaner, maybe we put split. Yeah. So we just know kung better. All right. And then we can do the same thing here. I will no longer show you, just do the same thing here. But in this case, hindi na tayo, we will no longer do the domains, but diretso na with the total sets. Yeah, let's do it na. So I'll just copy paste this one here. And then let's do this. Sige, total nandito na tayo. Then let's complete everything. So life satisfaction. So tables, and then we name this table. Table 3, life satisfaction among respondents, and then N equals 714, and then just give a space here for it to breathe, and then we just put it here. So table 3 presents the mean standard deviation and perturbations scores per indicator of satisfaction with life, right? the overall mean score for satisfaction with life is 22.20 plus minus 6.149 with a verbal interpretation of moderate. Sorry, kailangan natin ito ng SWS. Of moderate. Among the items, the conditions in my life are excellent, garnered the highest score of 4.85 plus minus 1.3335 with a verbal interpretation of moderate. All scores for all items are also in the moderate level. And that is what you're going to be submitting as a group for your assignment. Sorry, make this APA style. We remove the borders and then we clean it up. There you go. And then probably just put some indentation here. All right, so we have that already. Okay, so now we have the values here. So this is what should be. So we have already answered question 1, 2, and 3. And for the future assignment, we'll answering question numbers 4, 5, and 6. So this will be kind of the same questions you'll be asking in a similar fashion for your thesis, especially for from the department of behavioral sciences and sociology. So yun. And if you're doing quantitative research. Okay, so, and then of course you put here all of the findings for your descriptive. So andito lahat ng descriptive findings ko. So just for purposes of making sure that you really did it. Okay, so I hope that you are able to do this also on your own so that you will be able to have independent work when you do your thesis already. Okay, see you for the next video.